The Two of Swords in Joe Bandel's Oak Tarot of Love and Romance marks a radical departure from the traditional image of a blindfolded woman in a stalemate, replacing it with a moment of startling mental clarity between two people. In most decks, this card represents a deadlock or a refusal to choose, but here we see a man and a woman looking directly at each other while two glowing swords stand crossed between them. It isn't a wall, it's a mirror. The composition immediately signals that the tension isn't about being stuck, but about being seen so clearly that it's actually uncomfortable.
It's a fascinating reinterpretation because it shifts the entire focus from external indecision to internal self-discovery. In Bandel's Oak Matrix philosophy, which he's developed over decades, duality isn't a conflict or a war, but a loving embrace of opposites. When you look at the artwork for this Two of Swords, the cool silvers and soft blues suggest a mental or platonic realm, since the Suit of Swords in this deck represents mental love, but those warm golds pulsing from the swords hint at something transformative. The relationship is acting as a literal mirror, reflecting parts of the self that were previously hidden in the shadow.
The visual details really emphasize that specific kind of unease. You mentioned the colors, but look at the expressions. Their faces show excitement mixed with nervous realization. Bandel describes their breathing as slightly quick and their eyes as searching. That doesn't look like a stalemate. It looks like the moment right before a massive breakthrough. If the Ace of Swords was the initial spark of a new idea or a mental connection, the Two is where that connection starts to reflect your own image back at you. Why do you think that specific moment, seeing yourself through another, is described as so exposing?
Because it's the end of the performance. We all have a version of ourselves we present to the world, and even to our partners in the early stages. But the Two of Swords represents the moment that facade starts to crack under the weight of genuine mental clarity. When Bandel talks about the soulmate cycle in his guidebook, he's referring to the integration of the masculine and feminine within the self. In this card, the other person isn't just an external partner, they're a catalyst. You aren't just seeing them, you're seeing who you become when you're with them. That exposure comes from the realization that you can't hide your insecurities or your brilliance when someone is holding up that level of truth.
It's interesting how Bandel breaks down the experience by gender too. He suggests that for the male experience, there's this sense of the self growing stronger, but also noticing parts that feel unfamiliar or even challenging. It sounds like a confrontation with one's own identity that wasn't possible in isolation. Usually we think of relationships as places where we find comfort, but this card suggests the relationship is actually a laboratory for ego deconstruction.
Exactly. For the masculine energy in this card, it's often about moving from a state of rugged independence to a state of vulnerable integration. If he's been relying on a specific archetype of strength, seeing himself mirrored in the partner's eyes might reveal that his strength is actually a defensive shell. The challenge Bandel identifies is staying in that emotional fire rather than retreating back to the practical woods of abstract concepts or tasks. It's about acknowledging that his sense of self is changing, which is terrifying if you've spent years building a fixed identity.
And for the female experience, Bandel notes a feeling of being both seen and slightly exposed. The connection helps her understand herself better, but that seen quality has a double edge. There's a relief in being understood, but a vulnerability in being transparent. It reminds me of the psychological concept of the Michelangelo phenomenon, where partners sculpt each other into their ideal selves. But here it feels less like sculpting and more like stripping away layers to see what's actually there. The glowing swords between them act like a scanning light, revealing the truth of their mental state.
That's a perfect analogy, and we shouldn't overlook the oak tree in the background. In the Oak Matrix, that tree is the ultimate symbol of endurance and grounded reality. It's the anchor for the entire deck. By placing it behind this couple, Bandel is saying that while the mirror effect is intense and the realization is nervous, there is a structural integrity to the situation. The oak represents the stability that allows this level of self-discovery to happen without the individuals completely losing their minds. It's the king of trees, providing a sanctuary where this mental work can take place.
But isn't there a risk that this mirroring becomes a loop of projection? If I'm just seeing myself in you, am I ever actually seeing you? Traditional tarot interpretations of the Two of Swords often warn about being stuck in your own head, and while Bandel has removed the blindfold, the swords are still crossed. There's still a barrier, even if it's a glowing one. It seems to suggest that even with this new clarity, there's a boundary that must be respected.
That's the nuance of the platonic or mental love suit. Swords deal with the mind, and the mind loves boundaries and definitions. The crossed swords represent the intellectual framework of the relationship. They aren't meant to be dropped, they're meant to be understood. Bandel's philosophy is heavily influenced by Gnostic ideas, specifically what he calls organic Gnosticism, where the goal is wholeness through the integration of the shadow. If the relationship acts as a mirror, it's reflecting your shadow back at you. If you don't realize it's a mirror, you'll just get angry at your partner for having the traits you've suppressed in yourself. But if you see it as the Two of Swords, you realize the irritation is actually an invitation to heal.
So the slight unease mentioned in the card's description is actually a positive sign. It's the feeling of the ego realizing it's no longer in total control of the narrative. When the card says to stay open as you develop a stronger sense of who you are, it's really a call to resist the urge to look away from the reflection. It's much easier to go back to being blindfolded and pretend the stalemate is just an external problem, rather than an internal discovery.
That's the get real moment of the deck. Many romance-focused tarot decks lean into the happily ever after or the emotional highs, but Bandel is looking at the mechanics of the soul. He's saying that real love, especially the mental, communicative kind represented by swords, is a high-frequency energy. It's like a resonant circuit where the body and the aura have to sustain a lot of power. This Two of Swords is the moment the circuit closes and the light turns on. It's beautiful, but if you aren't grounded, if you don't have that oak tree's roots, you might feel like you're going to blow a fuse.
The color palette helps drive that point home, the cool silvers and blues of the mind meeting the warm golds of the spirit. It's that intersection where logic meets intuition. In a reading, pulling this card would suggest that you're currently in a period of transformative self-discovery through a specific person. It's telling you that the friction you're feeling isn't a sign of incompatibility, but a sign of progress. You're seeing things you couldn't see before because this person is providing the exact angle you needed.
It's a shift from duality as war, me versus you, my needs versus your needs, to duality as a loving embrace. Even the swords being crossed is a geometric embrace. They meet at a central point. In the oak matrix, that center point is where manifestation happens. If the couple can handle the nervous realization and the searching eyes, they move toward a version of themselves that is more integrated. They stop being two separate people trying to solve a puzzle and start being two aspects of a single cycle of growth.
I'm struck by the idea that this is a platonic card in a love and romance deck. It suggests that the mental connection is the bedrock for everything else. Without this clarity, the emotional stuff in the cups or the physical stuff in the pentacles is just wandering in the dark. You need the swords to see what you're actually dealing with. Bandel seems to be arguing that the most romantic thing you can do is be a clear mirror for someone else, even if it makes them a little shaky at first.
And that requires a huge amount of trust. You have to trust that the other person won't use what they see against you, and you have to trust yourself to handle the parts of you that are being revealed. That's why the uncertain smiles are so important in the artwork. They're recognizing the danger of the exposure, but they're choosing the excitement of the discovery anyway. It's a very courageous card. It's the moment you decide that the truth of who you are is more important than the comfort of who you were pretending to be.
It's also a reminder that we aren't static. The Two of Swords isn't a final destination. It's a step in the larger soulmate cycle. Today, you're seeing yourself through them. Tomorrow, you might be integrating a new part of your shadow, and the day after that, the mirror might change again. The oak tree stays, but the leaves and the light are always shifting. It makes the idea of a soulmate feel less like finding a perfect piece of a puzzle and more like finding a perfect sparring partner for the mind.
A partner who has the rugged competence to hold the sword and the quiet presence to look you in the eye. Bandel's work really challenges that Hollywood version of love where everything is effortless. He's saying that the messy, sacred bonds are exactly where we grow. If a relationship doesn't have that Two of Swords moment where things feel a little exposing, it might just be a shallow connection. The unease is the proof that something deep is happening.
It's a powerful way to look at those uncomfortable phases in a partnership. Instead of asking, "Is this working?" the card asks, "What am I learning about myself right now?" It turns a potential conflict into a shared project of self-awareness. The glowing swords aren't weapons. They're the light of consciousness being held up between two people who are brave enough to look. It really changes the way you'd interpret a stalemate in your life.
Exactly. A stalemate isn't a lack of movement. It's a high-pressure equilibrium. If you're feeling that tension, it's because you're right on the edge of a breakthrough. The Two of Swords is the invitation to stay in that tension until the clarity becomes your new foundation. Like the oak tree, you have to be able to weather the storm of your own self-discovery if you want to reach that ancient wisdom Bandel keeps referencing.
The depth of Joe Bandel's Oak Tarot really shows how a single card can act as a gateway into a much larger philosophy about how we relate to ourselves and others. By removing the blindfold and focusing on the mirror, the Two of Swords becomes a guide for navigating the necessary discomfort of growth within a relationship. It reminds us that being seen is both the greatest gift and the greatest challenge of love. If this exploration of the mirror effect has given you a new way to look at your own connections, pass this along to someone else who might be standing at their own crossroads.